And I was like, mind blown.
Right into my screen.
Right into Serena's screen. Because we're sat beside each other right now. That's how big the explosion was. Hello, 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 and welcome to Well Shit. It really is that simple. I'm Claire.
And I'm Serena. On this podcast, we help you to understand about your 12 universal needs, why they are currently not being well met,
how to meet them in ways that work for you, and how to consistently do so in quick, easy, and simple ways that fit seamlessly into your life.
We'll also help you to understand how doing so will have a positive ripple effect in literally every area of your life.
If you like what you hear, please support us on Patreon.
And enjoy the show.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, everyone.
So I can't believe we're finally here. We are actually recording episode 1.
Again,
right. So the reason Serena has just said again is that this has been in the works for a couple of years. We've been talking about doing this podcast, I think.
Yep.
And people have been asking us to do a podcast for a long time, or asking initially me to do a podcast before Serena was involved in the business. And we actually recorded episode 1 for the first time about 4 months ago, I think it was. Yep. When I wasn't even here in Key West. I was back in the UK, and it was a great episode. Then life happened and things kind of got in the way, and we ended up saying, okay, we're going to pause doing the recording until I get out here. And then it didn't feel right to kind of use that as the first one. We wanted to kind of get them all with the same kind of energy and setup and everything. So we decided that we record number 2, as in we were going to do this a second time, and we were going to re-record the same episode. We are actually going to release the original pilot to our subscribers on Patreon. So if you're not already on there, go and check it out. But I think that this is going to be really fun to do this again from where we are now, because even just in the last 4 months, things have changed quite significantly, haven't they?
I'm every day things seem to be changing. I mean, you do have to check out the original video. You get a really, really in-depth tour of my bathroom.
It's beautiful.
It's
high glamour.
So glamorous. So glamorous.
And there are things, I mean, I just know we're not going to include everything that we covered in this one. So go check it out. But I think let's kind of dive in. And I think that maybe the thing that would be helpful to begin with is, why are you listening to this podcast? Why listen to us? What do we know about this stuff? I think that's good place to start, right?
I mean, we're awesome.
Well, of course, yeah. But why about needs? So maybe if I share a little bit about my journey. So I'm going to share about my professional journey with the needs work. And we're going to do some episodes in the future where we're going to you're going to get to know us a little bit more personally, and I'll share more about my personal journey. But how I got here with respect to the professional stuff is that I've been working as a coach and mentor, trainer and consultant for about 11 years now, I think it is. And when I first started, I started a business where I was coaching women on how to do life in a way that felt kind of more authentic to them, and in a way where they could find balance and that kind of thing. And then for a long time, I worked as a relationship specialist, so many, many years. And I worked with men, women, people who didn't identify as either, singles, couples, people getting divorced, people getting married, literally all facets. And the thing that was really interesting for me was that every single person who came to me when I was a relationship specialist came to me with the exact same problem. And Serena is smiling because she knows how people normally respond when I say that. And I can hear you at home, like listening, thinking, what? I mean, and because different relationship issues, right? Money, sex, infidelity, all the things, communication, conflict resolution. But the reality is that all of those are kind of the symptoms. But the core issue underneath every single one of those people who came to me was that my needs aren't being met in this relationship. Or more specifically, that the other person isn't meeting my needs. And I remember thinking at that time, like, is that their job? Yes, there are needs that we have to have a mutuality and a reciprocity in our relationships. We need to both be putting effort in and receiving effort back out again. But when it comes to our base level needs as human beings, is that something our partner should really be doing? Probably not. So what I started to do is, and this kind of story runs parallel with my personal story. As it turns out, when the needs work really kind of came through, it was for me personally. But I actually also started to look at needs from a professional standpoint at one point, where I was like, actually, it'd be really helpful to teach my clients about needs and how to start to take care of these for themselves, so that doesn't end up negatively impacting their relationship. So and I had done personal development for a long time. I'd come across lots of needs models, but none of them felt right. They all felt like they were missing something. So I started to work on my own content around this. And what was interesting was when people started to hear about the needs tools that I created to work with my clients, they're like, wow, that feels really different. Like, I really think you need to be sharing this wider than just with your one-to-one clients. And I was like, no, it doesn't feel like that. I'm just going to use this as a little tool for my coaching business. And then I had a moment where I was in Chicago, and I was binge watching documentaries, which anyone who knows me well will know that's not something that happens very often. Binge watching, I mean, I enjoy a documentary, but binge watching tends to be for ridiculous TV shows that have no real cultural or educational value whatsoever. I was watching, and I went through this 2-week period where I watched on everything, like the government, money, food, health, Scientology, you name it. And it was at a point in my life where I didn't used to swear that much. Now, I now co-host a podcast which is called
Well, shit. It really is that simple.
So obviously that's changed somewhat.
Maybe it's your potty mouth co-host.
It could be. It could well be. That may have something to do with it. But I remember at the time I was watching with somebody, and I remember slamming my hand down on the pause button, going, "Holy shit!" And they like jumped out of their skin. They're like, "What?" And I was like, "Holy shit!" And they're like, "What?" And I realized that in every one of those documentaries was a problem. And at the root of every one of those problems was at least one unmet need, which meant that the needs work was, at least in part, the solution to every single one of those problems. And I was like, mind blown.
Right into my screen.
Right into the screen. Because we're sat beside each other right now. That's how big the explosion was. I realized at that point that all these people who've been asking me to share this as more than just a tool I use with my clients were probably right. And it was maybe a bit bigger than I thought, and maybe a little bit more important than I realized. And that was the point, combined with my own personal journey, where I actually started, I needed it first and foremost for me as a client. And that's when I then started to sort of share this more widely, and that's kind of where I'm at, why I'm here, and how I got here. So you want to share a little bit about how you ended up here?
Yeah, I started my journey the time warp of just time in general. A couple of years ago, Claire and I became friends, and that's how our relationship started.
About 4 years ago now, I think.
It was 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. We became friends, and I noticed as we got closer and closer, needs came up a lot. And anybody who knows Claire and speaks with Claire, needs do come up a lot. It's about your needs. It's needs, it's needs, it's needs. And back then I was like, that's a lot of needs. Like, And now I find myself doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
But I kept finding myself leaning in. I'm like, that makes sense. And she'd say something. I'm like, okay. And the more it started to make sense, the more I started to do things a little bit differently. And I thought that I got it. And at the beginning, there's a story that we talk about often, we'll probably share repeatedly, but it was a moment that will probably go down in infamy in our relationship, when I was sitting there and I was like, oh yeah, I get this. I get it. I was like, I could probably even teach this.
And I was like, yes, absolutely, you could. There may be a few more things that you need to understand before that point, because I knew that Serena kind of got it at a very superficial level. She didn't really get what was really different about this yet. And I knew she would get there, and I knew that was going to need to happen before the teaching part happened. And look where we are right now, right?
Here we are.
I was right.
So I knew needs. I knew what needs were. I grew up learning about Maslow, and, I knew that needs were.
Because you learned it in school, right?
I did. I learned it in school. I learned it in elementary school, and then I learned it again in college. It came, almost full circle in my education, kind of bookended it. And needs, and in the development of the internet age and social media, like we see a lot of posts on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter about self-care, about needs. And so I thought I had the concept. I'm like, yeah, I'll get a massage, I treat myself, all of these things. And then all of a sudden it came to the point I was like, oh, the more I learned, I'm like, oh. And it came to one moment where I looked at Claire and I'm like, I realize I don't get any of this, but I want to, and I want to get all of it. Mm-hmm. And that really started my journey into really embodying what the needs were, getting into the deep dive of the program.
Right.
And that's where
that
really
was the transition
started.
where you really kind of went deep with the universal needs, yes, rather than just these ideas and concepts of needs that you'd had previously. I saw that happen. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was that deep dive that really got us to literally where we are right now.
Right. And it's funny actually, because initially I said people had talked to me about doing a podcast for a really long time. And I kept saying, yeah, one day, yeah, we'll get to it. And people were like, yeah, we got some great stories. It would be really fun. And like, it would be good to hear them. And I was like, yeah, one day. And then when we were doing the deep dive, when Serena went through the universal needs work at a very personal level, where we took her through and helped her to understand, not just understanding what the needs were and how to meet your needs, but actually how they applied in her day-to-day life with the challenges and things that she was experiencing. What we realized, and especially last year, because we did this in 2020. So we've also, in the context of a pandemic, in the context of all the Black Lives Matter movement and what was happening on that side of things, there was a lot that we were using for that understanding, to how to embody this and really live it rather than just understand it as a concept. But as we were talking, there were so many moments where the conversations we were having, I was like, this would be really helpful for somebody else to hear. And so we would, as we were having these conversations, and as I'd be pointing out, Serena would be like, there's this going on. And I'm like, that's this, and this need. And she's like, oh my goodness, it is. And I was like, if you just do this, this, and this, then that will shift it. And she would have this experience. It was like, oh my goodness, that was actually way easier than I thought it was going to be. And that's actually how we ended up naming the podcast, because as we were going through that deep dive, there was one phrase which kept being said over, and I don't even know how many times I heard Serena say it through the course of those months that we were doing that deep dive. And that phrase was,
well, shit. It really is that simple.
And it was like, and it became this kind of long, running joke that, because it wasn't something that, oh, that was a saying that was funny between the two of us. It would literally just roll off her tongue, and then she'd be like, oh, I've said it again, haven't I? And I'm like,
well,
yeah.
Shit. Well, shit.
Right.
Well, shit.
And so when we were looking to name the podcast, I was like, I want something that could be like a little bit fun and maybe a bit edgy and communicates our personality. And that's when Serena said,
well, shit.
It really is that simple. And as soon as she did, I was like, oh my God, yes, that's it. That's what we need to name it, because that was really the one thread that kept coming up over and over and over again.
Well, if you haven't noticed, the name of this podcast is Move Over Maslow. There are new needs in town, where Maslow and all of these needs models are so ingrained in what we're learning, or what some people, in my experience, what I learned. Why do we need something new?
Right. And it's important to say that there are lots of other needs models out there. And as I said, Maslow is the industry standard that a lot of people teach and a lot of people refer to. So as Serena said, she learned it in school and in university. It's taught in management trainings. It's taught in medical trainings. It really is kind of the baseline that most people go to. There are other people who teach about needs models and methodologies. So you've got people like Tony Robbins, who teach 6 human needs. You've got John Schindler, who wrote a book called How to Live 365 Days a Year, where he has 6 needs that he teaches. There's all of these different things. So yeah, why do we need something more? Because there's plenty there already, right? Well, there are a few reasons. The first is that the needs models that are out there, every single one of them is missing at least one of our critical needs. There are things, they're incomplete. They don't really represent all of the things that we as human beings need on a regular basis. And there's a reason for this. Like, it makes sense. If you think about it, all of the models that are out there have been put into society in the form that they are known by predominantly straight white men. And if you think about how straight white men have been socialized and conditioned, and what they've been conditioned to value or devalue, or to focus on or not focus on, it makes sense why there are some things that are obviously very important in those models and some things that are less so. Let's look at an obvious example. So if you look at emotion, so how men are socialized around emotion, to avoid emotion, to repress emotion, to not express emotion, to hide emotion, to act like they don't have emotion. What ends up happening is that obviously there are very few of the needs models out there that actually really effectively address our emotional needs within the models that are shown. And the thing is that, and the interesting thing is, we all know as a society, and this is a commonly held understanding, that the lack of focus and understanding and relationship that a lot of men have to their emotional needs and their emotions is the cause of a lot of mental health issues in men. Like, it's why one of the reasons the suicide rates are so high, because they're not actually processing their emotions. They're not taught how to deal with their emotions in a way that's healthy for them. So it makes sense that because of where a lot of these needs models have been developed in the form that we know them as, they've come through these filters, and certain things have been filtered in and certain things have been filtered out. And so it's important to recognize that there are some really critical needs that are missing from the needs models that we already have. Second thing is that one of the things that is missing is a focus on the how. And what I mean by the how is, in my experience, it's not just about what the need is that is important. It is the way that we choose to meet the need, which is as important and sometimes even more important than understanding what the need is. Now, I'll go into this a little bit more detail further on in the podcast, in this episode. But it's really important to understand that the ways of meeting the needs will determine how well our need is met or unmet. And without having a layer of that in the models and methodologies that are out there, it's really missing something critical.
Yeah. The third reason is there's a lack of focus on the kind of do-it-yourself aspect, and doing it for yourself, meeting your needs for yourself. And a lot of that relates right back up to that how. If you don't know how, you don't know the ways to do it and the ways to do it that are going to fulfill you, how are you supposed, how can you do it without the how?
How can you do it yourself if you don't know the how that you need to do?
Exactly. And then the fourth thing is that most of these models don't focus on the consistency, the needing to do it over and over again to really ingrain it within yourself.
And understanding that your needs are, then it's not like a one and done thing. Your needs are continually changing because our situations are changing, our state is changing, the circumstances we're dealing with is changing. And so we need to be consistently staying on top of what needs are present in those different variations.
Now, in our in the Universal Needs Program, we teach there are 7 keys. So I'm going to throw it over to Claire to go through what those 7 keys actually are.
Yeah, so 7 keys to ensuring that all of your needs get and stay consistently met. So let's look at number 1. So number 1 is what? You need to know what your needs are. And obviously we talked about the fact that the other needs models are missing some of these vital needs. And the thing is, unless you understand what your needs actually are, it's really difficult to do something to ensure you're meeting all of them. You can be doing things for yourself, but you might be missing one of the needs because you're not aware of the fact that it's there. It's a little bit like if you're making a recipe. If you're trying to make a cake, and you have a bunch of ingredients on the bench in front of you, but you don't know you're trying to make a cake. If you can look at the ingredients, you can go, well, I can make bread out of this, I can make a cake out of this, I can make cookies out of this, I can make pasta out of this. The only way to actually, or the best way for you to ensure you're going to end up with a cake at the end, is to know you are trying to make a cake as you are doing it. So you can put the ingredients together in a way that is going to create that cake. Same thing is true with the needs. You want to make sure that you understand what the need is to ensure that the things you're doing are going to actually meet those individual needs. So the second key to getting your needs consistently met is possibility. And that is that it is possible for you to meet the majority of your needs for yourself. Now, we're not taught this. As I said, as Serena said, the DIY is missing in a lot of the needs models that are currently out there. But the thing is that because when we are born on this planet, we have no ability to meet any of our own needs. We're this tiny little baby. We can't do anything for ourselves. We can't feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, comfort ourselves. We can't even expel air from our own bodies without someone coming along and patting us on the back and helping us. So we learn to be dependent on the world around us to get our needs met. And for a lot of us, most of us, we had some form of caregiver around us that taught us, that knew they had to make sure we could physically survive in the world. So we learned from seeing what they were doing. They taught us how to dress ourselves, how to cook for ourselves, how to go out and earn a living. And what we've done is we've applied that to our physical needs. So I know that it's my job to feed myself. I know it's my job to dress myself, as much fun as it could be for somebody else to do it on occasion. But I know that that's my job and I have to do it for myself. But when it comes to our emotional needs, because most of our caregivers, they didn't get taught this in the same way as we didn't get taught this. They didn't know about our emotional needs. They didn't know how to teach us that it's our responsibility, that it's possible even for us to do, to meet our own needs for ourselves at an emotional level, and therefore we have never learned how to do that. So most of us are walking around physically like adults, but emotionally we're still acting a lot like toddlers because we're still looking to the world around us to meet our needs, whether that's our job, whether it's our partner, our family, our friends. We're looking to get our emotional needs met through other people. Now, it's important to say we are social creatures. So it's not, yes, it's possible for us to meet most of our needs for ourselves, but we still have this need to connect, to relate, to be in community, to connect with other people. And so we have these sort of social needs, which are needs that we can't meet for ourselves because it requires another person. But the thing is, if we don't get our base level needs met, our needs as an individual met first, before we go into these relationship or social situations, what ends up happening is that we don't get our social needs met in that environment because we're so busy trying to get our other needs met through that person. And it's a really ineffective way of doing it, because the way that I would get my needs met, the way that Serena would get her needs met, are going to be completely different. If I go to Serena to get one of my needs met, she's going to try and meet it in the way that works for her. But it's probably not the way that's going to work for me. She doesn't know when I need it. She doesn't know how much of it I need. So it's a really ineffective way to get that kind of base level need met for myself. But that's actually going to be what's the most important thing, because it's a base level need. Like it's critical. Like that's going to be the driving force until that gets taken care of. It's only once that's taken care of and those needs are met that we actually get to enjoy the relationship needs, the social needs, and we get to connect and get those needs met. So if our base level needs aren't met, we actually end up not getting either of our needs met particularly well. Third key to getting all of our needs consistently met is how. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. The way of getting your need met is just as important, if sometimes more important than understanding what your needs are. So when we teach about needs, we teach that there is a spectrum and that the way you meet your needs sits on a spectrum. The need sits in the middle and the way sits from one end of the spectrum to the other, somewhere along that line. At one end of the spectrum is the red spectrum. So this is the way that we're kind of socially taught to meet our needs. And these are the ways of meeting our needs which aren't very helpful. They're the kind of less fulfilling, less healthy, sometimes more toxic, sometimes more draining ways of meeting needs. I describe it like the TV dinner way of meeting needs. And what I mean by that is that it might stop you from being hungry, but it's not providing you the nourishment that you require. So you might stop being hungry for maybe 20 minutes or half an hour, but soon after you're going to want, the indicator from the brain is going to go, I need nourishment because I never got any in the first place. So that kind of need to keep trying to do those same things over and over again because we're not actually getting the nourishment that we require. At that end of the spectrum, you can be doing loads of stuff to meet your need, but receive really little benefit in terms of the need actually feeling fulfilled. The green end of the spectrum is the other end of the spectrum. So this is the way that's a little different to us because we've not been taught to do things that way. These are the more healthy, the more nourishing, the more fulfilling ways of getting our needs met. So I describe this as like the whole food, home cooked, nutritionally balanced, really yummy way of meeting our needs, where not only does it stop you from being hungry, it actually provides the nourishment. So not only do you get filled up, but you actually stay full for longer. And at that end of the spectrum, those ways of meeting needs, you can be doing very, very little to meet the need, but getting a huge amount of benefit in terms of the need being met. So that's one of the ways that the how shows up. The other thing that's important with the how is understanding that the ways of meeting needs are different for different people. So the things that work for me and the things that work for Serena and the things that would work for you are all going to be different. So it's about finding the ways that work for you specifically. And the ways that are I always talk about the 80-20 rule. Like, what is the thing that's going to take 20% of your effort and energy, but it's going to give you 80% of fulfillment? So those are the things that we're looking for when we're talking about the how. So number 4 is responsibility. And we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but it's the fact that it is your responsibility to meet your base level needs for yourself. So there is a quote in the Spider-Man movie, which I always come up with at this time, saying, with great power comes great
responsibility.
It's almost like we've done that before. And the thing that Spider-Man doesn't teach us is that the opposite is also true. So what happens is that when we give responsibility to somebody else to meet our needs, what ends up happening is we also give with that the power for them to determine our inner well-being, our emotional state, and sometimes our physical state as well. And what ends up happening is that by giving that responsibility, we give away the power. But the reverse is true. When we take back responsibility for meeting those needs for ourselves, we take back the power to create that internal state. Now, what I'm saying when I say this, I'm not saying that everything's all sunshine and rainbows and there's never any problems, never any challenges. Not in the slightest. What I'm saying is that by taking back that ability to provide that internal fulfillment, you provide yourself the resources, you become more resourced to be able to deal with the ups and downs of life more easily as they come up. Number 5 is the big I, interconnectedness. So we will be talking about this a lot on this podcast going forward. This has been a big one, I know, for Serena on her journey.
Yes, it has.
So when we talk about interconnectedness, what we mean is is that we are all intrinsically interconnected as human beings. And what that means is how we show up and the things that we do will have an effect on other people and vice versa. So if we meet our needs in ways that work for us, but have a side benefit of negatively impacting somebody else, it's actually going to negatively impact our needs as well, even if we're not aware of it. And conversely, if we find ways of meeting our needs that at the minimum don't negatively impact somebody else, but maybe actually benefit other people, at that point, not only does our need get met, but it will actually benefit us more because it's benefiting the people around us. And we're going to talk a lot more about this on our next episode, where we're going to be starting to talk about being selfless and being selfish, and that there's another option available to us, which we'll share about on that episode. Where we can understand that interconnectedness just that little bit better and get a deeper understanding of it. And we're going to go deeper with these things. We're going to do, I'm just doing a quick overview today because we're going to go into these deeper in upcoming episodes. So number 6 is equity. And what that means is that we do not live in an equitable culture and an equitable society, which means that we're not all on an even playing field when it comes to meeting our needs. It means that those of us who have more systemic privilege, maybe because of the color of our skin, because we're white, because we're straight, because of our gender, because of our sexuality, because we're neurotypical rather than neurodiverse, there's a whole bunch of things like unearned benefits that we get from belonging to those groups. Now, what it means is, it doesn't mean our life is easy. It just means it is easier for us to get our needs met than it is for people who don't belong to those groups. What it means is that people who are more marginalized, who don't belong to those groups, it's harder for them to get their needs met. There are more barriers for them to overcome to get their needs met. And what we need to do is we need to be aware, because of the interconnectedness, because because the extent to which other people's needs are being met will actually impact ours and vice versa. We need to be aware of where we sit in that interconnectedness and equity, and make sure that we're doing what we can to try and redress that balance a little bit more wherever we can. And then the final one is consistency. So consistency is where we're wanting to talk here about not just doing something one and done. Like, as we said earlier, our needs aren't one and done. They're not there, met, okay, I'm done for the day, or I'm done for the week, or I'm done for the month. Your needs are continually changing, because once you've met that need, that's going to bubble down, and another need is going to come up to the surface. There's another need that needs to be met, and that's going to bubble down, another one comes up. So one of the quotes I always share is that everything you do every second of every day is done to meet your needs. I'm going to say that again. Everything you do every second of every day is done to meet your needs. And that's because your needs are always up. Your needs are always in play. And so what that means is that we need to create consistency so that not only do our needs get met, but they stay met. So if you think about, like, if you're wanting to build a muscle, if you're wanting to strengthen a muscle, you don't just weight lift once and be like, that's it, I'm done, we're good. I know that's your preferred way of training.
That is
right?
totally my preferred exercise. Like, why don't I look like a supermodel? I went to the gym for 15 minutes.
Right, exactly. So we don't lift a weight once and expect to build the strength. And it's the same thing. We don't meet our needs once and expect them to stay met. And it's like, yes, we might build a muscle once, but if we then don't use that muscle, it's going to atrophy and it'll disappear again. We need to consistently be using it in order for that strength to not just be built, but actually to stay present. And the same is true when it comes to meeting our needs. So we need to create that consistency. And I know that for you personally, Serena, like when we were going through this, that the interconnectedness and the equity and the consistency were the ones that were like, whoa, this is completely new. And I know that when we started, you didn't get it. Like, it was one of those things where you were like, this doesn't make any sense to me. But I also know as we went through the process, that you had this real kind of lived experience of like, oh my goodness, do you want to speak to that a little bit? That realization of, oh no, this is really true.
Well, after thinking I knew what needs were, thinking that I was adequately and actually just in general meeting my needs, the interconnected piece kind of came in, and I was like, well, why does it matter? Like, this doesn't affect anybody else. This is about me, right? You said this was about me. And there were little things that would come up, and I would tweak how I was doing things to take interconnectedness into mind. And then the feeling that I got when I wasn't considering my interconnectedness, I was like, okay. Then the feeling I got when I realized, I was doing things that were harmful for myself. I was uprooting my own needs in meeting my needs because I wasn't considering the interconnectedness.
Yeah.
And then the way it felt when I was like, oh, I just found like this works for me and them. Like, yeah, like that was just, it was so much more. And then also with the consistency of it, doing it over and over and over again, and really making it not just something that is a check off my to-do list for the day, but embodying it, the consistency became so easy.
Right.
That it was just like all of a sudden I was doing it. I was automatically thinking of the interconnectedness. My thought process completely changed because I'm like, what do I need? Okay, how is this going to affect everybody else? Where before I was like, what do I need? I need to give myself what I need. And now it's like, what do I need for myself? And I am part of a community. I am part of something bigger.
Right.
So I need to consider that something bigger. And now my thought process, it has that in the initial consideration. It's not the after effect. It's not the following up. It's in the moment.
Well, and the interesting thing with the consistency is we've all been there. We've all found something where it's like, yeah, this would be really helpful for me to be doing. Or like we've read a book, or we've got an app, or we've attended an event, or someone's told us something like, yeah, that's going to make a real difference. And it's like we get super excited about it for like 2 weeks or 2 days or 2 hours. Like, I mean, literally, there have been things where I'm like, yeah, this is amazing. And like 3 hours later, I've forgotten it was even a thing. And that's why the consistency is so important, because if something is going to make as much of a difference to your life as we both have experienced with the needs work, you want to make sure that that's not just being present initially, but it gets to stay present, because that's when it really makes a difference.
We had talked about earlier why do we need something new? Right. But why move over Maslow?
Yeah. Okay. So as Serena's kind of alluded to, there are some challenges with Maslow's work. I mean, the first thing is, as we said, there are needs missing there. The second thing is that actually, you know what, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not effective at ensuring that people get their needs met and keep their needs met in really fulfilling ways. From a multitude of different perspectives. We could do an entire podcast episode just on that. But for the sake of right now, we're just going to say it's not effective. But the third thing, and this is what's really important here, is that when it comes to looking at bodies of work that are out there, it's really important that we understand where they've come from. And I didn't know this when I first started. I'd never heard this. I'd heard about Maslow for decades, and I'd never heard this. I'd researched needs for a long time, and I'd never heard this. But it turns out that Maslow was not the originator of the hierarchy of needs. That what he did was he went and spent time with the Blackfeet Nation people, and he looked and observed how they did needs and how they related to their needs. But then what he did was he took that, in effect, he stole that. And then what he did was he put it through his filters. And by putting it through his filters, he warped it, he distorted it, he removed the things of real value from it that actually made it work. And so there's lots of information out there about this, and I'm not an expert on this piece, but it is really important for us to kind of presence this and to let people know that this is a thing, because there's multiple reasons why actually Maslow is not the model that we should be holding as our industry standard in any industry going forward. There's an article that was written called Maslow's Hierarchy Connected to Blackfoot Beliefs, which is by Karen Lincoln. It's either Michael or Michelle, I don't know how the surname is pronounced, which was written on April 19th, 2014. And in it, she quotes the saying, Maslow borrowed generously from the Blackfoot people to refine his motivational theory on the hierarchy of needs. What actually happened is that he said he went and spent time with them, and he took what they had, what they were doing, and he changed it and broke it apart and used it for his own benefit, and then put it forward as his own work without giving any credit to the influences of their teachings, and also misrepresenting it. Because one of the things that was really important to the Blackfeet Nation from the research that I have done is this link and connection between the individual, the community, and the culture, and understanding that what Maslow did was he stripped it all out and made it just about the individual. And by making it just about the individual, not only was it ineffective, but it actually it created harm, because it was no longer staying connected to, here's how the individual then feeds into the community. Here's how the individual and the community feeds back into the cultural perpetuity, to make sure that that their ways got to carry on for generations to come, got to last, and that had that longevity of being passed on from generation to generation. And in doing so, it was not only stealing the work, it was not only miscrediting the work or not crediting the work, it was misrepresenting the work and actually changing it so far that it was no longer what it was no longer effective, and it was actually harmful in how it was applied. So there's a quote there's a book called Transformation Without Greed, Native Self-Actualization, which is by Sydney Stone Brown, which PYSD. And in it, the quote came from the tribal members of the Blackfoot Nation in Strathmore, Alberta. And they said to her, Maslow got it wrong. He didn't share it the way we wanted. He didn't give the elders credit for his teachings, and they want the record set straight. So this is coming from that people who want to make sure that no longer is this being used and represented, or misused and misrepresented, and that the credit needs to go back, but also that it needs to be honored in its entirety, not taken out of context, and not diluted and distorted in such a way that it was no longer relevant and it was no longer applicable and effective and actually did harm.
One of the things I found most powerful on my journey with the universal needs is that we start with the base needs, and we start by meeting them consistently, but it's what comes next that really makes the difference.
Right. And I think that's the thing, is that, yes, we want to talk about consistency. Yes, we want to make sure that we're talking about all the things in the 7 keys. We're making sure that we are also aware of that community aspect and of the cultural aspect. But the thing that really that I notice more and more often when it comes to the needs work, and the difference when people think they get it and then they actually get it, like this is the kind of jump that normally happens. What helps make that jump, that leap between the two, is where we start off at a base level, meeting our own needs consistently at a base level, and then once our needs are being consistently met at a base level, what we then do is we apply our understanding of needs to what is happening every day in our day-to-day lives. how do the needs apply to our business? How do the needs apply to our relationship? How do the needs apply to our families? How do the needs apply to parenting? How do our needs apply to our self-worth or confidence? Like, let's look at all these different areas. And when we have issues in those areas, when we have conflict, when we have disagreement, when we have challenge, actually being able to look at that challenge or that conflict or those issues through the context of needs, through the lens of needs, and going, okay, this is why this is an issue. Here are the things, here are the needs that are up right now for me. How do I meet those needs? How do I use my understanding of needs now to navigate through this situation? And also, what needs of the other person is up? What needs are being triggered from the other person whose needs aren't being met, which helps us to have more understanding, more compassion. It helps us to be able to deal with them and engage with them in a way which is going to be supportive to them, not further impact them. And I know this has been something that's been very big for you, right? You've had, that was the beautiful thing with me watching you go through the deep dive was, yeah, learning about the needs was great. Yes, learning about the how, learning about the red-green spectrum, actually doing the needs practice, that was a really good starting point. But the point where I saw you come alive and it come alive for you was when you would come to me and you've got, hey, this thing's going on. And I'm like, okay, which needs are not being met in that situation? What do you need to do to meet those needs? What needs of the other person's being met? How do we? And that was the point where it was like, oh, wow. Like, this is so much more than just a practice to feel good or for self-care.
Absolutely. I mean, when we went through my deep dive, it was when I had been furloughed and then I had been laid off. And so I did have time to really go deep with it. And then I got hired back at my job and I came back and the way I was handling myself was differently. And people were noticing. People were like, normally would have gone off a little bit there. And I'm like, well, no, I know why or I can understand where they're at, what need of theirs isn't being met. So I can adjust myself. I can meet my need and then I can acknowledge. I can witness the fact they're in the place they're at and come from a human perspective and a compassionate perspective, not necessarily a placating or a sympathy like, oh, I feel sorry for you. You're in that space. It's like, oh, I've been there. Like, how would I feel where they're coming from? I see this need. Like, oh yeah, like I've felt that. So I can support myself within supporting somebody else, not doing it for them, but being like, okay, I don't need to make their life any worse. And that's not going to help me at all.
Right. And being able to, from that human to human perspective, say, like, I feel for this person. Not I pity that person, but I feel for them because I can relate. I understand. I've been there. I know how it feels when that need's not being met. And that changes how you engage with somebody. And it shifts often from that space of reaction. And the reaction is a reaction to our need not being met. So when we're reacting, like, it doesn't mean that you don't get angry about something or you don't get frustrated, because those are legitimate responses. Those are part of our needs. But rather than instead of taking that situation, getting angry and firing that anger at somebody else, which then triggers more of their needs, which then they fire back and then triggers more of your needs, etc., etc., etc.
Your cup goes
right, exactly. Instead, going away and processing that anger in a way that honors what you need, but doesn't negatively impact the other person and doesn't amplify the situation. That's when you can able to go, okay, yes, it's okay that I feel angry. Like, this is it's valid for me to feel angry in this situation. How do I need to go and process my anger? I'll go do that in the way that meets my needs, but doesn't then negatively impact somebody else. And it shifts. Like, issues with other people become very, very, I don't want to say easy to navigate, but there is a way through. There's a path through when you can see it through that kind of needs lens and needs perspective. And I mean, I just said easy. Like, the thing that we often say about this is that
it is simple, not necessarily easy. And the reason why we say that is because it can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable to face the things that you have been conditioned to and that you've learned over years and years and decades. And
unlearning that. And just unlearning that. Like, even facing that's one thing, but just the process of unlearning that, it's not necessarily easy.
But the methodology is simple.
And sometimes it is easy. Like actually meeting your needs is really easy. Like that's the super easy bit.
15 minutes this morning, my needs practice done. And I've been consistently re-meeting my needs and figuring out what was up. But that was simple.
Right.
And it felt good. And it was easy.
Yeah.
Because of the consistency of the practice and the embodiment.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, is it is simple when someone lays it out for you. And that's the thing I get with, I've had it with Serena, I've had it with so many clients, like, oh God, is it really that simple? Yes. It's the unlearning normally that's the bit that takes a bit of time and energy, because we've been doing things a long time. It's okay that's not necessarily quick and it's not necessarily easy. But actually with simplicity and with consistency, it's not that difficult either. And that's the kind of key. And it was, I remember that moment where you said, the whole quote about when you realized, you looked back to that moment where you said about, oh, I could teach this. Mm-hmm. And you said that quote, and what was it? That
I don't get it, but I want to, and I want to get all of it. It was, I wanted to turn on the fire hose and be like, I feel like I have been in the dark for so long. Like I was drinking out of a little water fountain, like, yeah. But now I wanted to lean in. I wanted to really get to know it, because the little bits that I was doing felt really good. And I'm like, this is going to feel even better. Right. And the deeper I get with it, and the deeper I go with myself, it's a continual journey. Yeah. The better it feels. And the more it feels it's coming from within me.
And the more I've seen you sharing about how it's rippling out to everyone around you.
Yes, it does definitely have a ripple effect in my life, because like when I first met Claire, needs, I find myself saying, well, that's that need. And, oh, this is this need. You know, if you do this, that might help that. And then I see people not having even gone through the program, but just doing things that are meeting their needs and identifying, I did this and I met my needs today. I did this to meet my needs. And even in our women's group on Facebook, it's like, today I did this, and this is what meeting my needs looked like today.
Right.
And then they start talking about it. And then somebody else kind of sideways, it's like, oh yeah, needs. Oh, I talked to so-and-so who had talked to you. And it's like, wait a minute. It was like glitter. Yeah. All of a sudden, these little shimmers were popping up in my world where I'm like, oh, look at you taking care of your needs. And like, and in myself, it was a little bit of glitter. And now I feel like it's just this big sparkly orb. Like I'm just constantly sparkling.
Right. And when Serena shares about glitter, like we're both, as you'll get to know us through this podcast, we're both dancers. I'm a salsa dancer, and I used to, I started in my early 20s, and when I used to go out dancing for the night or for a weekend or whatever I was doing, I would spray myself with a spray glitter before I went out. Like, it's fun, it's glitter, it's like, this is like, I just loved it. And I remember I had a friend of mine who shared with me that she knew everyone I danced with that night, because every single one of them was like covered head to toe, like the front of them with glitter. And it's like they'd been clad. Like, oh my goodness, she's like, I can spot, I know exactly who you've danced with. And that's the thing, is that when you're living it and you're sharing it, as soon as you come into contact with somebody, they get a little bit of it. And then because they've got a little bit, the person that they dance with gets a little bit of it. And you watch it kind of ripple out, and it's really beautiful. But I actually think that the best example of the power of this work and how profound it can be is really our relationship. Because I know that we had an amazing friendship when we first started this business journey together. And I remember thinking, God, is this really a good idea? Like I literally didn't know a single other person who had gone into business with somebody they had been friends with where it hadn't negatively impacted either the business or the friendship, normally both. Normally the experience I'd seen from a lot of people was that like both blew apart in a really awful way. And I was like, I didn't want this. And my intention, my hope when we first started this was that it didn't change our friendship. That was what I was hoping for. I didn't realize it was going to change our friendship for the better. Like I didn't even know that was possible. And I know that there are lots of people who, I mean, I've coached several different people who are in business with friends who if you look at what's being portrayed on the outside, on their Instagram feed or on their LinkedIn feed, it's like, yeah, everything's amazing. I work with my best friend. This is so great. I have been the one behind the scenes helping them deal with the reality, because the reality is not what's being portrayed. And I think that's the thing that I love about working with us. And because we understand our needs, and because we understand the needs of the friendship, and because we understand the needs of the business, and we're both putting energy and effort into that, what you see is what you get. Like if you see us on the street in Key West, we may be a little bit more extra than we are right now. There may be a tutu, there could be some glitter, like depending on what day of the week it is.
Definitely glitter.
But it's exactly the same. And if you were to sit with us when we're having a business meeting, it's exactly the same. And I think the reason for that is because we understand our own needs, and because we understand how to apply the tool of needs when there are issues and when there are challenges. I think a lot of the time, the reason this is an issue in businesses and friendships is because either there's an issue in the friendship, which then impacts the business, or there's an issue in the business, which impacts the friendship. And normally one impacts the other, and then that impacts back. And it kind of like, it's like a chain reaction that ends up in a big explosion. But the thing I love is that because we understand how to use this as a tool to deal with those issues when it comes up, it means that as soon as there is any slight issue in our friendship, we address it straight away. Not always comfortable, not always easy, not always pleasant, but we address it straight away. Same thing with the business. If there's an issue in the business, we address it straight away, which means that there is no crossover impact. And more importantly, actually, when there is an issue that's happened in the friendship, how we've dealt with it through understanding the needs has actually brought us closer together. And how the same thing within our business. Like when there's been a business issue, how we've dealt with that has been the thing that has brought us closer together. And I think that's the reason, and that's the thing that I see as being the differentiating factor that has made this work so well and continue to work better than I certainly ever expected. I don't know what you thought.
When you asked me, I was shocked because I'm like, okay. And knowing that what our needs are, and knowing what our needs are separately for the business, for our friendship, because those are all separate entities, and knowing, I feel like a lot of people just, if something's uncomfortable, they're going to be like, oh, well, it's not that big of an issue. And so you have this little thing. And what that uncomfortability is a need not being met.
Yes.
Either within yourselves, within the relationship you're talking about. And then you have another incident, it's like, oh, well, that's uncomfortable. And I'm already annoyed at this, and I don't want to make this into a bigger thing. And then they start compounding, and they start building up. And all of a sudden, something that was a little issue that would have been a little uncomfortable to deal with turns into this blowout about something a lot of times that wasn't even the issue to begin with. It's just the little annoyance that kind of
that triggers that chain reaction of all of those unmet needs under the surface that have been building and compounding over time.
Yeah, so we hit it. It comes in. If there's anything right in that moment, it's like, all right, I really, and we acknowledge, I really don't want to do this. This is not going to be easy. And then it's
we need to clear this, and it's gone.
It's gone.
And not only is it neutralized, but as I said, normally how we deal with that, I mean, not always. We're there are times when it's like, oh, okay, that's just a non-issue. But when it's a big thing, quite often how we deal with it, we go, oh God, I feel like I'm so grateful for you. I really appreciate. Like it brings us closer together.
It does.
Both as business partners and as friends, and that's the thing that I was surprised by. Like I didn't expect that to be the case, and I develop this and teach this. Like I was like, oh, that's kind of cool seeing how that works. And so that's what we wanted. That's another one of the things that we've seen that's made a difference for us. And we really want to share that with you and to help you to understand how to navigate the challenges in your life and your relationships. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to start doing this podcast, because we hope that by sharing some of our stories and the how we do things, that you might start to understand, get some little nuggets of the things that might be able to help you. So I think that's probably it for today, isn't it? Let's is there anything you want to share before we finish up?
No, I just hope to see those little sparkles all over the place now.
So thank you so much for listening. Like, stick with us. We're going to be going into more of the things that we've talked about today. The coming episodes, we've got a series of podcasts coming that are going to go deeper into them and will help you understand what we're talking about a little bit better. I hope you've enjoyed today's introduction. If you've got any questions, if there's anything like, oh, could you do something on this, get in touch with us via our social media or the universalneeds.com website. Let us know what you want to hear about, and we'll have one of these conversations to help with the thing that is mattering to you and the things that's going to make a difference and the thing that's going to help you to meet your needs best. So I think that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Stay safe. Lots of love. And between now and when we speak again, continue to meet your own needs. Lots of love. Bye. That's it for today.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and give us a written review,
as it will help more people find us. And remember, when the old needs models no longer work, it's time to try something new.
Well, shit. It really is that simple.